Thanks so much for joining us today. Let's get right to it. How will the war in Ukraine affect Idaho agriculture?
Last week, Melissa, we hit a 50-year high in commodity prices on the futures market. It already affected us and the whole world, and it will continue to be just devastating on, your perspective, whether you're a farmer or a consumer of goods from Ukraine and Russia. It will continue to affect us very severely.
So why is that? Ukraine is what, 5,000 plus miles away. Why is a conflict as horrific as it is in Ukraine affecting Idaho ag?
Well, about Russia and Ukraine combined are about 20-30% of the world's wheat producers in the world, and their wheat goes largely to the most devastated, impoverished, famished countries in the world. It's a far different market than Idaho's wheat, where it goes to. They go to places like Yemen, Lebanon, Egypt, Libya, stricken with famine and very in desperate need of wheat, where their diets are largely bread.
So it sounds like it's ripple effects that are affecting the market. With that in mind, is Idaho's wheat sector more affected than, say, potato or dairy?
Yes, it would be on the prices side. But Idaho wheat is a far different market than the Ukrainian and Russian wheat. It's a white wheat that goes to the Pacific Rim, your Japan and Korea and Philippines, and it's a far different segment in the market, so they don't really compete very much.
Well, so how about the inputs for agriculture and how that affects producers? Are we seeing effects on, obviously fuel, but how about fertilizer?
Yes, fertilizer. Those countries there, Russia, I think produces 13, 14, 15% the world's fertilizers. And a lot of that is produced from natural gas, your nitrogen fertilizers. And for example, they produce over a quarter of the fertilizer that's used by the EU. And that's ripples through the whole market in farming here in the United States. And we've seen horrific run-ups because of natural gas prices, run-ups in fertilizer costs. And as you listen to farmers around, estimates of $200 or $300 increases in input costs per acre. It's really a delicate, precarious time for Idaho farmers.
And we're coming out of another time of uncertainty for Idaho farmers and ag producers when we're talking about the effects of the pandemic. Are those stresses on the supply chain alleviated yet, or are we still seeing those effects?
No. Melissa, this situation is unfolding and it's going to get worse in my estimation. We're coming off of drought, supply chain, COVID, and now input prices. And the worst of all that affects farmers, most of all, is inflation. They can stand it and they can cope with these drought and other types of things. But inflation is what killed farmers in the 80s, and it devastated them. As I listen to farmers around the state, they're in the most precarious position that they have ever been in their lifetimes. And they're looking at interest rates are going up, and supply chain disruptions and export market disruptions, and they're trying to balance all of these things out with drought and all of these other uncertainties in their inputs and their output prices.
Bottom line, how is this going to affect food prices for the average consumer in Idaho?
Melissa, food prices, the old saying that there's less than 6 cents of wheat in a loaf of bread, that's true. And farmers have long complained about that. So if wheat prices go up 50%, well, there's 9 cents. It's not going to affect the price of bread in Idaho. What you're going to see is this ripple through other types of things into corn markets, into other feed prices. And even when you start messing with corn prices, then you mess with alfalfa prices, which are in a large part, some part determined by corn prices. And then that affects the dairy input prices, input costs for dairies. It places a whole different dynamic for all of agriculture in the state of Idaho.
You're describing this intricate and delicate balance with livestock feed from corn being affected by inputs, and that's affecting food prices down the line. Is there any good news out of this for either farmers or consumers?
Well, farmers are making more money now. Whether that's going to be balanced by costs or taken away by larger costs, that's yet to be seen. And whether they can balance that with drought and stuff like that. But these are very good prices for farmers. In fact, Melissa, we've had some very good years for farmers the last few years. We're looking at record highs in cash receipts and last year, and almost a record high in net farm income. I'm looking at on the cash receipts side, breaking record highs again in 2022. Now, whether the income is going to be there, I just don't know if that costs are going to eat up all of those revenues a lot.
Because there's the money that's coming in, but then there's also the money that has to go out to pay for that extra cost of fertilizer and feed and everything. Is there any way to know how long things might be this unstable?
Well, Melissa, right now it's immediate. Those ports out of the Ukraine have stopped shipping wheat right now. In fact, I heard the news that several of the ships have been hit by rockets from the Russians. So all the exports of that wheat is not coming out. And right now in the Ukraine is when just like Idaho, they're deciding what to plant. The farmers are starting to get out the fertilizer. They have no fertilizer. They have no fuel, diesel to run tractors and everything like that. It's immediate, and it could last. The disruptions in the farmers' supplies in Ukraine could last for years as they get fertilizer or seed or other types of inputs that they've got to buy and to produce this thing. It's going to be a catastrophe for a number of years. And I want to emphasize that it's going to happen in a lot of the field. It's not only Ukraine's economy, but it's going to happen in these very vulnerable countries, Syria and Lebanon. And that's really who's going to be feeling the real crunch of all of this loss of wheat for their people.
We have about 30 seconds left. Very briefly, is there anything from either the congressional or legislative side that can be done to address this or alleviate it?
I do not think so. This is something, Putin, go home. This is just not something we need for anything. And I just have little hope for any kind of long or short-term solutions to these things. These disruptions are going to really hurt all the way around the world for quite a number of years, Melissa.
All right. Garth Taylor, University of Idaho, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thank you for having me.